All right, Blood Meridian, page 5. The Reverend Green had been playing to a full house daily as long as the rain had been falling, and the rain had been falling for 2 weeks. When the kid ducked into the ratty canvas tent, there was standing room along the walls, a place or two, and such a heady reek of the wet and bathless that they themselves would sally forth into the downpour now and again for fresh air before the rain drove them in again. He stood with others of his kind along the back wall. The only thing that might have distinguished him in that crowd was that he was not armed. "Neighbors," said the Reverend, "he couldn't stay out of these here hell holes right here in Nacogdoches. I said to him, you gonna take that son of God in there with ye?" And he said, "Oh no, I ain't." And I said, "Don't you know that he said, I will follow ye always, even unto the end of the road?" "Well," he said, "I ain't asking nobody to go nowheres." And I said, "Neighbor, you don't need to ask. He's a gonna be there with ye every step of the way, whether you ask it or you don't." I said, "Neighbor, you can't get shed of him. Now, are you going to drag him into that hellhole yonder?" You ever see such a place for rain? The kid had watched the Reverend intensely. He turned to the man who spoke. He wore long mustaches after the fashion of teamsters, and he wore a wide-rimmed hat with a low round crown. He was slightly wall-eyed, and he was watching the kid earnestly as if he'd known his opinion about the rain. "I just got here," said the kid. "Well, it beats all I ever seen." The kid nodded. An enormous man dressed in an oilcloth slicker had entered the tent and removed his hat promptly. He was bald as a stone, and he had no trace of beard, and he had no brows to his eyes, nor lashes to them. He was close on to 7 feet in height, and he stood smoking a cigar even in this nomadic house of God. And he seemed to have removed his hat only to chase the rain from it, for now he put it on again. The Reverend had stopped his sermon altogether. There was no sound in the tent. All watched the man. He adjusted the hat and then pushed his way forward as far as the crate-board pulpit where the Reverend stood, and there he turned to address the Reverend's congregation. His face was serene and strangely childlike. His hands were small. He held them out. "Ladies and gentlemen, I feel it is my duty to inform you that the man holding this revival is an imposter. He holds no papers of divinity from any institution, recognized or improvised. He is altogether devoid of the least qualification to the office he has usurped, and has only committed to memory a few passages from the good book for the purpose of lending to his fraudulent sermons some faint flavor of the piety he despises. In truth, the gentleman standing here before you, posing as a minister of the Lord, is not only totally illiterate, but is also wanted by the law in the states of Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Arkansas." "Oh, God!" cried the Reverend. Lies, lies. He began reading feverishly from his open Bible. On a variety of charges, the most recent of which involved a girl of 11 years, I said 11, who had come to him in trust, in whom he was supposed to surprise to be in the act of violating while actually clothed in the livery of his God. A moan swept through the crowd. A lady sank to her knees. "This is him!" cried the Reverend, sobbing. "This is him! The devil! Here he stands! The devil!" "Let's hang the turd," called an ugly thug from the gallery to the rear. Not 3 weeks before this, he was run out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, for having Congress with a goat. Yes, ladies, that is what I said. Goat! "Why, damn my eyes if I won't shoot the son of a bitch," said a man rising at the far side of the tent and drawing a pistol from his boot. He leveled it and fired. The young teamster instantly produced a knife from his clothing and unseated the tent and stepped outside into the rain. The kid followed. They ducked low and ran across the mud toward the hotel. Although gunfire was generally within the tent and a dozen exits had been hacked through the canvas walls and people were pouring out, women screaming, folks stumbling, folks trampled underfoot in the mud. The kid and his friend reached the hotel gallery and wiped the water from their eyes and turned to watch. As they did so, the tent began to sway and buckle, and like a huge wounded Medusa, it slowly settled to the ground, trailing tattered canvas walls and ratty guy ropes over the ground. The bald-headed man was already at the bar when they entered. On the polished wood before him were 2 hats and a double handful of coins. He raised his glass, but not to them. They stood at the bar and ordered whiskeys, and the kid laid his money down, but the barman pushed it back with his thumb and nodded. "These here is on the judge," he said. They drank. The teamster set his glass down and looked at the kid, and he seemed to, you couldn't be sure of his gaze. The kid looked down the bar to where the judge stood. The bar was that tall that every man could actually get his elbows up on it, but it came just to the judge's waist, and he stood with his hands placed flatwise on the wood, leaning slightly as if to give another address. By now, men were piling through the doorway, bleeding, covered in mud, cursing. They gathered about the judge. A posse was being drawn to pursue the preacher. "Judge, how do you come to have the goods on that no account?" "Goods?" said the judge. "When was you in Fort Smith?" "Fort Smith? Where did you know him to know all that stuff on him? You mean the Reverend Green?" "Yes, sir. I reckon you was in Fort Smith before you come out here." "I was never in Fort Smith in my life. Doubt that he was." They looked from one to the other. "Well, where was it you run up on him?" "I never laid eyes on that man before today. Never even heard of him." He raised his glass and drank. There was a strange silence in the room. The men looked like mud effigies. Finally, someone began to laugh. Then another. So they were all laughing together. Someone bought the judge a drink. It had been raining for 16 days when he met Toadvine, and it was raining yet. He was still standing in the same saloon, and he had drunk up all his money save $2. The teamster had gone. The room was all but empty. The door stood open. You could see the rain falling on the empty lot behind the hotel. He drained his glass and went out. There were boards laid across the mud, and he followed the paling board of doorlight down toward the baseboard jakes at the bottom of the lot. Another man was coming up on the jakes. They met halfway on the narrow planks. The man before him swayed slightly. His wet hat brim fell to his shoulders, save in the front where it was pinned back. He held a bottle loosely in one hand. "You better get out of my way," he said. The kid wasn't going to do that, and he saw no use in discussing it. He kicked the man in the jaw. The man went down and got up again. He said, "I'm going to kill you." He swung with the bottle, and the kid ducked, and he swung again, and the kid stepped back. When the kid hit him, the man shattered the bottle against the side of his head. He went off the boards into the mud, and the man lounged after him with the jagged bottleneck and tried to stick it in his eye. The kid was fending with his hands, and they were slick with blood. He kept trying to reach into his boot for the knife. "Kill your ass," the man said. They slogged about in the dark of the lot, coming out of their boots. The kid had his knife now, and they crouched and circled crabwise. And when the man lurched at him, he cut the man's shirt open. The man threw down the bottleneck and unsheathed an immense bowie knife from behind his neck. His hat had come off, and his black and ropey locks swung about like his head, and he had codified his threats to the one word "kill" like a crazed chant. "That's in cuts," said several men standing along the walkway watching. "Kill, kill," slobbered the man walking forward. But someone else was coming down the line. Great steady shucking sounds like a cow. He was carrying a huge shillinglauf. He snatched the kid first, and when he swung with the club, the kid went face down in the mud. He'd have died if somebody hadn't turned him over. When he woke up, it was daylight, the rain stopped, and he was looking up in the face of the man with the long hair and was completely covered in mud. The man was saying something to him. "What?" said the kid. "I said, are you quits?" "Quits? Quits. Because if you want some more of me, you're sure as hell gonna get it." He looked at the sky, very high, very small, a buzzard. He looked at the man. "Is my neck broke?" he said. The man looked up over the lot and spat and looked at the boy again. "Can you not get up?" "I don't know. I ain't tried." "I never meant to break your neck." "No, I meant to kill you." "That ain't nobody done it yet." He clawed at the mud and pushed himself up. The man was sitting on the planks with his boots alongside him. "There ain't nothing wrong with you," he said. The kid looked about stiffly at the day. "Where's my boots?" he said. The man squinted him. Flakes of dried mud fell from his face. "I'm going to have to kill some son of a bitch if they got my boots." "Yonder looks like one of them." The kid labored off through the mud and fetched up one boot. He slogged about in the yard, feeling like lumps of mud. This your knife?" he said. The man squinted at him. "Looks like it," he said. The kid pitched it to the side, and he bent and picked it up and wiped the huge blade on his trouser leg. "Thought somebody done stole you," he told the knife. The kid found his other boot and came and sat on the boards. His hands were huge with mud, and he wiped one of them briefly on his knee and let it fall again. They sat there side by side, looking out across the barren lot. There was a picket fence at the edge of the lot, and beyond the fence, a boy was drawing water at a well, and there was chickens in the yard. There, a man came through the dream-shroud door down the wall toward the outhouse. He stopped where they sat and looked at them, and then stepped off into the mud. After a while, he came back and stepped off into the mud again and went around and up onto the walls. The kid looked at the man. His head was strangely narrow, and his hair was plastered up with mud up in some bizarre and primitive coiffure. On his forehead were burned the letters HT, and lower and almost between the eyes, the letter F. And these markings were splayed and garish, as if the iron had been left too long. When he looked to turn at the kid could see that he had no ears. He stood up and sheathed the knife and started up the walk with the boots of his hand, and the kid rose and followed. Halfway to the hotel, the man stopped and looked out at the mud, and then sat down on the planks and pulled out on his boots, mud and all. Then he rose and slogged off through the lot to pick something up. "I want you to look here," he said, "at my goddamn hat." You couldn't tell what it was, something dead. He flapped it about and pulled it over his head and went over, and the kid followed. The Dram house was a long, narrow hall, wainscoted with various varnished boards. There were tables by the wall and spittoons on the floor. There were no patrons. The bartender looked up where they entered, and a nigger that had been sweeping the floor stood the room against the wall and went out. "Where's Sidney?" said the man in his suit of mud. "In the bed, I reckon." They went on. "Toadvine," called the bald man. The kid looked back. The barman had come from behind the bar and was looking after them. They crossed from the door through the lobby of the hotel toward the stairs. There were various forms of mud behind them and on the floor. As they started up the stairs, the clerk at the desk leaned and called to them, "Toadvine!" He stopped and looked back. "He'll shoot you." "Old Sidney?" "Old Sidney." They went on up the stairs. At the top of this landing was a long hall and a window light at the end. There were varnished doors down the walls, set so close they might have been closets. Toadvine went on until he came to the end of the hall. He listened to the last door, and he eyed the kid. "You got a match?" The kid scourged his pockets and came up with a crushed and stained wood box. The man took it from him. "Need a little tinder here," he said. He was crumbling the box and stacking the bits against the door. He struck a match and set the pieces alight. He pushed the little pile of burning wood under the door and added more matches. "Is he in there?" said the boy. "That's what we're fixing to see." A dark curl of smoke rose, a blue flame of burning varnish. They squatted in the hallway and watched. Thin flames began to run up over the panels and dart back again. The watchers looked like forms excavated from a bog. "Tap on the door now," said Toadvine. The kid rose. Toadvine stood up and waited. They could hear the flames crackling inside the room. The kid tapped. "You better tap louder than that. This man drinks some." He balled his fist and laid fast to the door 5 times. "Hellfire!" said a voice. "Here you come."